Hi everyone, this is Leah Salonga, and I just wanted to send a message of support to all Asian Americans in this time of COVID-19. It is abominable and absolutely imbecilic that anybody would be racist against anybody else. I have friends that have been spat on in the street because they're Asian, and I know that this is a time of great fear and anxiety, but this is a time when everyone should be uniting in fighting this disease rather than keeping people apart and spreading divisiveness and hatred and fear. So I wanted to just send this to all of you, that you have my support and that you have my love.
So I implore my fellow Asian Americans to actively think about and engage in the history of institutionalized racism in this country, and not just how it affects us, but more how it has affected and continues to hurt disproportionately communities of Black and brown people. Because we cannot remain silent. We have to show up for one another, whether it be in your comment sections in social media, with your friends at school, or most importantly, at your dinner table with your family.
I've never in my life been afraid to go to the grocery store out of fear that someone was going to kick me in the face. In my head, I have to think, what will I do and what will I say if someone comes up and attacks me? I've never had to live in fear like that. And it makes me sick to my stomach, it makes me scared. It definitely makes me not want to go outside.
Hi, this is Margaret Cho. I don't know if I'm telling people not to be racist. You know what? You know not to be racist, don't you? Don't be racist. Don't be racist. Don't be racist. Hey, don't be racist. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vicky Nguyen with NBC News, and welcome to the United Against Hate Town Hall. Really happy to have you all joining us today. As you know, we are living through an unprecedented time in the world. This coronavirus pandemic has certainly brought out the best in much of our communities, but it has also brought out some of the worst. With reports that this virus originated in China, we're also seeing a rise in discrimination against people of Asian descent, and here in America, certainly Asian Americans. These aren't just reports. We have data from law enforcement agencies to back it up. And we also have survey data. We're not just talking about blame. We are also talking about incidents of verbal and physical attacks. A group called Stop AAPI Hate has been keeping track of these racially motivated incidents and hate attacks. And they have reported there have been more than 1,700 incidents of harassment against Asian Americans just since mid-March. We are joined this afternoon by a group of folks who are doing really important and vital work to help us all stop this harassment and this discrimination. Before we get to their introductions, I'd like to share with you a few stories of people who have experienced these incidents firsthand.
I was waiting in line by myself to meet up with some friends who were already inside the venue that I was waiting at. Behind me, I hear a female voice go, we got this guy from Wuhan in front of us who won't stop looking at us. And I noticed this spitting noise behind me. One of the guys was sort of spitting at my feet in my direction.
So I take care of COVID hospitalized patients. So recently I was taking a ride on the subway. And as I was walking through the subway station, a gentleman approached me and started yelling racial slurs at me, which is something that I've honestly never experienced before, especially in a city as diverse as New York. So he walked up to me and he said, you dirty Chinese, you damn Chinese, this is you dirty Chinese. And he just kept saying that over and over again.
I had a person who was, placing an order, and she just said, hey, I know that a lot of your staff is Asian. Can you please confirm that none of you have gone to China in the past, 14 days? We have this man who was walking by the shop and spat at the shop. And he says, F you, F you Chinese, you have the coronavirus, in there.
If you all are watching this and you want to join the conversation, you have questions, you have comments, you have experiences of your own that you want to share, please do use the hashtag ASAMUnited. We will definitely look at those comments, we'll respond. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panel today. It's a very distinguished one. First, we have Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus Chair, Representative Judy Chu with us. We also have KPAC First Vice Chair, Representative Grace Meng. John Yang is also joining us. He is the president of the Asian Americans Advancing Justice. And Manju Kulkarni, who is the executive director of APCON. Thank you all for being here with us on this important day. First big picture question. You look at these statistics that have come out. Can you tell us about what you're hearing in your corners, in your communities, and have any of you personally experienced this kind of discrimination?
What we're seeing at Stop AAPI Hate is that this is a widespread problem. Not only do we have 1,700 incidents in a 6-week period, but we're seeing them from across the country. Individuals from 45 states have reported to us, and even with shelter-in-place policies, individuals are experiencing harassment, shunning, even discrimination at grocery stores, at pharmacies, at big box retails, and even in their neighborhoods. And so we're really concerned about what's happening in this country. You mentioned the Ipsos poll. In addition to individuals, all individuals who are seeing this, 60% of Asian Americans have witnessed individuals blaming our community for the coronavirus. So it's really concerning for us.
I've certainly got my fair share of looks. I will admit that I have not had any racial epithets thrown at me verbally up until now, which I am appreciative of. But definitely, I think all of us have been getting different looks. People that seem to be walking a little bit away from us or keeping even further than the 6 feet physical distancing that is required. And that is disturbing. It's some of it, you can't tell what the motivation is, but it certainly is disturbing.
For a lot of folks, this is a new fear. This is a new intimidation to go out and feel like people may be looking at you differently or interacting with you differently. I saw on a social media feed, a viewer had sent in a photo of someone at their store in California who was walking around with a mask that said, "Thanks, China." So there's little acts like this that may not be reported to the police, may not even be reported to some of these advocacy groups, but are contributing to a very hostile environment. What can we do to stand up for ourselves and for each other?
I think the most important thing is for our Asian American community to not feel isolated. It can feel just so incredibly disturbing to have somebody say these insulting things to you, things that you may not have heard since childhood. It is important to report these incidents, even if you think that these are minor or are not something that needs to be reported. The ability to report gets you out of that isolation. Now, I've been on so many town hall meetings where I get questions like, should I report? Am I in danger if I report? And I always say to them, please, it is so important for you to report. First of all, it is important for us to know what is really going on in this country. But secondly, this will reduce your feeling of isolation. And these organizations are here to help you. If it is indeed a very serious kind of hate crime, they can get you the resources that you need, and you can have some direction on what to do, and you can feel empowered.
And another way that we can combat this discrimination is to continue to reach out and to build the coalitions that our communities have been building. I sponsored a resolution condemning anti-Asian sentiment during this virus. And I want to commend Chairwoman Chu, because within days, she reached out to the chairs of the other caucuses, the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, and worked with the chairman, Hakeem Jeffries, of our entire Democratic Caucus, and put together a press conference so we could show that our communities are mutually supporting each other, standing up for each other, and condemning hate.
It makes a lot of sense. It is important to use every platform we can, whether it's a grassroots movement or a political movement that gets a little bit more of a spotlight. Andrew Yang did a video with some celebrities. It was called "We Are All Americans." This was a way to respond to the coronavirus racism. I was so happy to hear that that happened, but I would venture to guess that most of the people watching in our audience, maybe even some of you, had not heard of this. Why is it so difficult for these types of campaigns focused on the Asian American community to gain traction?
Part of it is, on one level, we're still a relatively small community. We represent 6% of the American population, unlike the African American and Latinx communities that are much larger. On another level, what we need to do is, going to Representative Meng and Representative Chu's point, is build more solidarity with each other. Because the fact of the matter is that all of our communities are experiencing disparate impacts because of COVID-19, whether it's a health disparate impacts with respect to the African American, Latinx, and Pacific Islander communities, whether it is access to healthcare and employment issues, getting access to the PPP loans. So showing that solidarity between all of us is part of what's going to make all of us stronger and be able to fight this better and get the story out more about how we reduce the racism, reduce the tensions within all of our communities.
I will say this, the Today Show provided us with a platform to do a piece about these incidents and these crimes. For that, we are so grateful. But I was surprised at some of the responses that I got on social media. Overwhelmingly supportive. People didn't know this was happening. They were grateful it was brought to light. But there was a minority voice of people who were saying, so now that it affects Asian Americans, this is why you care. Where were you when, African Americans were experiencing discrimination? And it surprised me that that was part of the response, that there's, to me, racism isn't a competition. It isn't about speaking up just for one group over another. It's not a zero-sum game. So when you talk about building solidarity, absolutely, that's vital. How do we get that message out so that it resonates with other groups, that we are all in this together?
You raise such an important point, Vicky, and I think it's that understanding of American history and the fact that, unfortunately, racism has been part of that for so many years. We know that the Yellow Peril was the impetus for the Chinese Exclusion Act. It then led to Japanese American internment in the 1900s. And so now we're seeing the latest iteration of that for our communities. But we know too, in our alliances with African American and Latinx communities, that they too have had experiences that are troubling and that similarly need redress. And really it is about all of us coming together. And it is really shocking to folks that this is, happening to them for the first time. I think for those of us who have been in these communities where we've shown alliances, we know that there's nothing surprising about it, but that we also now, unlike previous times, have leaders like Congresswoman Chu and Congresswoman Meng who are really out there fighting for all of our communities.
I want to float something by you that one of the diversity executives at NBC mentioned to me, and that is there sometimes is a tendency to say, oh, look at that group. They're screaming and shouting and marching in the street. Look at that group. They're having a parade. But maybe it's not authentic to what Asian American cultures are. And when we try to do something that may have worked for another group, it may backfire. So we have to rely on what is part of our culture and our understanding. I thought that was a very interesting perspective. I wonder what you think about that. And what is that? What is the Asian American superpower? What is it that we can do? Because there are certain stereotypes that are very much assigned to this community.
Well, one thing that I have to say is it's so important not to pit one group against the other. And that unfortunately has been the history in America. But in reality, if you look at our experiences, we have so much in common. We have been victims of discrimination, and we are now trying to organize and fight back. Actually, I think we have much more in common than we do that divides us. And so I have been so encouraged, certainly in Congress, to see the response I've had from my fellow colleagues, as Congressmember Meng has mentioned. the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, our Native American caucuses, our Democratic leadership have all embraced the idea of stopping this anti-Asian hate crime. But in return, I must tell you that we have been very, very active all this time on the issues that affect African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans, and other vulnerable people in this country. I think our unity is our strength, and that's what we have to build on.
Representative Meng, I want to follow up on something, an experience you had apparently in Congress when you confronted House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, because he kept using the term Chinese coronavirus. And obviously we all know the president for a time was using that term until he stopped and tweeted that we shouldn't be blaming Asian Americans. We should be supporting Asian Americans. I'm happy he did that. I think we all know how much words of leadership matter. But this, you actually went toe to toe with Kevin McCarthy. Tell everyone about that, and what was the resolution?
Well, I saw that he had tweeted about the virus using the actual term Chinese virus. And I didn't want to, just tweet at him. I wanted to make sure that he knew what was happening to so many Asian American communities across the country. And so, I wasn't being political. I just went up to him as I would do any colleague on any issue. I felt I owed him the respect to raise this issue and to explain, not that I was telling him what words to use as a colleague, but the impact that his words could have. I was disappointed that he wasn't really interested in listening to me. And, I tried to chase after him a little bit, but, we were in the beginning of social distancing and I didn't want to frighten him. But I just thought that, I had hoped that he was going to try to understand what impact words like that could have.
Something else that I got in response to the story was, this is fake news. This isn't happening. You guys are making this up. I mean, when we have video evidence of these things, when we have NYPD telling us that they've investigated more crimes in the span of 1 month in 2020 than they did in all of 2019 with regard to hate crimes against Asian Americans, these are facts. So I think the more that you can fight against this with facts, call for unity, and at least make those human appeals like you did, Representative Meng, hopefully people will start to realize and believe that this is true, that this is really actually happening. We're very familiar with some of the big groups that speak out on behalf of civil rights. Why do Asian Americans not have a singular voice, something like the NAACP or the Americans, the ADL? Why is it that we don't seem to have one singular voice or nonprofit or group that can speak to these issues and get the kind of attention that some others do?
Well, I actually do want to say that there are groups, NAACP, ADL are amongst many of the groups who are actually first to come out and support our community and condemn this sort of rhetoric and actions. And, I wanted to allude to a little bit what John said before. Our community is a lot smaller. We are a lot newer to political and civic activism. Mm-hmm. And I'm so proud and honored that organizations like the NAACP and ADL are working together with us. And we have a lot to learn from them and to work with them as well.
Congresswoman Meng alluded to that, is that if you think about the history of Asian American immigration, it's not until the mid-1960s, after the Immigration and Nationality Act, that we really started to come here in large numbers. So the fact is, although on one level, we've been here for centuries, that we had Asian Americans that were part of the Revolutionary War, in terms of sheer numbers, sheer percentages, we're the most fastest growing population in the United States. We've increased by about 78% since the 2000 census. And what that suggests is that we are just getting at the cusp of political mobilization, of organizing. And the other aspect of that is our diversity. I agree that our diversity is a strength, but part of that is the fact that we speak different languages. We represent 50 different nationalities at least, and over at least 100 different languages. So the notion of organizing for all of us is going to look a little bit different, may take a little bit more time. And if you think about the history of African Americans in this country or Jewish Americans in the country, they've gone through these similar progressions. So I look at it in a positive light, in that, it will take time, but we're on a positive trajectory.
So I'm hearing that you're saying it's relatively new, that we're young in the history of America and coming together. But there are partnerships that are forming, especially at a national level, that can help. What can we as individuals do, especially if by preference, by profession, you are not inclined to be an advocate or a social justice warrior, but now you're realizing, hey, my voice does matter. How do I add my voice to the cause and help it be a force for positive change? What can each of us do?
I think there's a lot that we can do, Vicky. I think on an individual level, we really need to be upstanders right now. So this is no longer a time of individuals being bystanders and just watching what's going on. But if you see something, say something. Make sure you provide help and assistance to those who are experiencing this. If you can provide immediate support at a grocery store or in the neighborhood, make sure you speak out if you hear your neighbors or friends making comments. I want to say too that even on a community level, when we come together and we say that hate is not acceptable in our neighborhoods, in our schools, that's going to go a long way in terms of preventing these type of future incidents. And then I think on a state and national level, it's really important that we have the leadership that we do that's looking at policy solutions, that we go out and vote in November, that we participate in the census. There are lots of things that we can do here in 2020 to make sure that we have a foundation to prevent future hate and to come together as a society and a country.
Well, I think that there are 3 things that individuals can do. First is that if you know somebody who has experienced this kind of AAPI hate incident or crime, encourage them to report. Make sure that they know that there are these websites that are made to accept these reports and do something about it. The second thing is to educate people as to the fact that this is going on. I know that when we first started in Congress in January and all this was happening, that I led a letter to all the members of Congress about what was going on with AAPIs and these hate incidents. And many of them were very surprised. I mean, they knew something of it, but they did not know the extent of it. And the third thing is to stand together. Yes, if you see something happening, well, you can do something about it. There are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, and I just think they're great. The first one is distract. If you see somebody having a racial taunt against an Asian, you could maybe drop your keys on the ground and say, "Oh, can you pick them up?" So that's a very subtle way of dealing with it. Delegate. You can find an authority figure to say, "Can you do something about this?" Document. You could take out your iPhone and document it. Make sure you're safe though. Direct. You could have a direct statement like, "Knock it off, please," but make sure you're safe. And delay. You can try to see if you can change the interaction so that there is a time delay. And one thing about delay is that if the thing happens so quickly, you can at least check in with the victim later on to make sure that they're okay. Ask them if they are okay. Believe me, that will go a long way.
That's great. I love that there are action plans, things. Obviously, you want to be safe, but there are things people can do, and they just have to have a category in their mind and practice it. That's another thing that I read about with people. How do they deal with this? It's just being prepared, knowing that this could happen to you so that it doesn't hit you out of the blue, and you may have a better response that can keep you safe, where you might be able to stand up for yourself or someone else. That's extremely helpful. So just in terms of final thoughts, I want each of you to please give us your thoughts in terms of where we need to go, what you're encouraged by, and where you think we need to still apply our work ethic to improve relationships and to improve the standing of Asian Americans.
Well, I think it's important for us to continue to find these stories that we've all been talking about, good or bad. It's important that people do feel like we are, helping them speak up and giving them a platform. And sometimes what we found within our own community, because there are so many people who might not feel comfortable, maybe we can be a little proactive, even as individuals, in reaching out.
For me, it's a 1-2 punch. Facts matter, stories matter. The facts, the statistics help speak to what is going on in a way that people cannot deny. But it is undeniable also that the stories matter, because there's a personal connection that people see to them. People will feel like, yeah, I am not alone, because they see themselves in these stories. I think the last thing I would say is the resilience of our community. It is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and we should celebrate that. And we know that currently we are dealing with an environment of fear of the COVID-19 pandemic and fear of anti-Asian hate. But historically, we have risen through that, through these other periods that we've talked about. And I'm confident that we can again by showing the solidarity, both within our own community and with other communities of color, other vulnerable communities. So in that respect, I'm certainly resilient. I am certainly optimistic that we will get through it together.
Well, what I want to say to everybody is you are not alone. If such an incident happens to you, I want to tell you that there are so many people that want to help you, that want to make sure it's reported, that want to make sure that we stop it. But in order for us to stop it, we need to know that it's happening. And that's why it is so important to report. And it is so important for us to speak out. It's important for us to speak out if such a thing happens, to hear these stories, but it's also important for those of us that do not want these instances of discrimination to occur, to be able to tell others that this is happening so that we can unite with all our allies out there so that we can have a stronger voice together to end this, so that we can make sure that this is an America that continues to accept everybody where everybody can achieve the American dream.
Thank you so much. Speaking out, if you've experienced this, speaking up for others, being united, finding ways for us to come together instead of being divided, to speak out against this discrimination and hate. I learned a lot today in this panel. Just a reminder, the hashtag is ASAM United, to please share your voice, to join in, to be a part of this movement. United Against Hate. Thank you for joining this town hall. Another shout to Manju Kulkarni, who is the executive director of APCON, John Yang, president of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and of course our representatives, Grace Meng and Judy Chu. Thank you so much. We are so grateful for your time today and on such an important topic.
Let's all try to be a little bit kinder to each other. Let's stop trying to point fingers and find someone to blame, and let's start actually focusing on the vaccine, or focusing on how can we make a stranger's day a little bit brighter.
If you hear or see discrimination or injustice of any kind, you have to speak up, because we cannot get through this without each other. We cannot destroy the model minority myth by staying silent. So, I ask you on this Asian Heritage Month to come together so we can kick bigotry's ass.